All right, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show, Saturday edition. I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs of Sumer Sports. I'm joined by the Grayson McCall jersey-clad Ben Brown, Sumer hat, Umla. I love the look, Ben. We
We
got to watch one half of UFL football already. How is your weekend going so far?
yeah, I mean we pissed teal, right? I think that's basically where we're at this point. I'm just obviously McCall, NC State, the colors aren't going to be the same, but I still think likely path for them. We're going to be sweating it out here in like 2 years. UFL spring football season. I think Grayson McCall is going to be my favorite quarterback. So I'm just trying to get out in front of the hype. That's soon to happen, I would say, with the likes of the spring football league. So no, it's been good. I'm excited. We obviously have the draft as well, so this is I would say an exciting time of the season for the NFL as well. So we got to get into it.
It is an exciting time. We have the draft coming up in 5 short days on Thursday, and that's going to be where we start. We are at halftime of the St. Louis Battlehawks hosting the Memphis Showboats. That game, Memphis comes back furiously, covers the first half number, which was anywhere from 4 to 3.5. They came back and did their thing there. That was a very interesting and a twist and turn of things.
Not a lot of defense. Yeah, not a lot of defense,
Not a lot
right?
of defense played. In fact, I don't think St. Louis punted that entire first
Missed
half. They
field
did throw an
goal.
interception. They did miss a field goal. So there were some trials and tribulations there, but not a lot in the way of defense. To your point, Ben, St. Louis came in 7 point. They were up to 7.5 point favorites somewhere. They're close 5.5, depending upon where you look. So there was some Memphis money late. We'll get to the final three games. Actually, there's two games that happen at the exact same time, which will be an interesting thing for folks to deal with who want to have a little bit of action on those games later on because they'll have to watch like one game and kind of follow along on the apps.
I
But we're
will.
going to go ahead and look at the markets as they stand, Ben, at the NFL draft. So let me go ahead and pull that up here on your screen. We're starting to get some people coming in here. We are going to start, as we always have, because we're adults. We're going to go ahead and start with the number 2 overall pick. My new computer is actually being kind of interesting.
It looks
As
like you're struggling over there, so that's
I
okay. I
am.
mean,
I
look,
am. My new streaming computer, which we're going to use for the draft show, which, by the way, everybody, is Thursday night at 7:30. By the way, Ben Brown, Tay Seth, Sean Syed, and Sam Brookhouse will all be in Detroit covering the draft for the first time for Sumer. They will be at the media. They will be at the media Radio Row. And then Thomas Dimitroff, myself, and producer Matt Scopsey will be in Atlanta. We will have the draft show 7:30 until the conclusion of round one on Thursday night. The fellas will have the show starting middle of the night Thursday night, Friday morning for the start of the to preview the second round, kind of going all day Friday, and then Thomas Dimitroff and I will be hosting an hour on SiriusXM the following day to preview day 3. But Ben, I feel like we were very prescient here. We told the people
2 weeks ago.
the people 2-3 weeks ago that this market, the number 2 pick market, the favoritism that was being shown towards Jaden Daniels was on air. And we've seen this thing now. Daniels, as of last week, I believe when we were talking, was minus 200. It had gotten up to like minus 300, minus 350 in some other markets, or sorry, other sports books. This is one market, but other sports books. And now for our friends at FanDuel here, he's down to minus 125. Drake May is minus 105, if I'm not mistaken here. If you go ahead and look at that. So I look at this market now, and like I said before, I wouldn't take Daniels at this particular time. If again, there's no inside information suggesting Daniels going to Washington. But if you feel convicted now, I do feel like this is the price point to take either May or Daniels. If this is something you want to bet on, it's basically, it's not a coin flip. Obviously, you're paying 25 cents of juice to lay Daniels, 5 cents to lay May. But it's much more palatable on both sides, especially in the case of Daniels here, to actually make a bet.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, like you said, we obviously talked about this a couple weeks ago. May was very much like the side to bet at that point. To me, I think this did get down, maybe not specifically on FanDuel, but I very much think this was like a -115 market in other books, basically, which very much indicates like this is as close as it comes. Kind of like we said a couple weeks ago, like it very much wasn't set in stone. I think the reason we saw this movement this week was because of the reports, regarding Washington's visit with the top 4 quarterbacks. And to me, if that's the movement that is driving the market, I'm maybe a little bit surprised that a guy like JJ McCarthy didn't at least bump up some because of those reports. I do think it's very close between Daniels and May, but I also think there at least could be some there could be some substance to the fact that like Jaden Daniels' agent is frustrated right now with the Washington Commanders. Maybe in certain areas like Drake May could be as well, and I do think like that could point toward them going completely off the board at the 2nd overall pick, and maybe getting a guy like JJ McCarthy right away. I don't know, but that would maybe be the one outlier type opportunity that would really be enticing in this market to me right now.
Yeah, so you're saying McCarthy at 16-1, just completely sort of going off the cuff here, thinking that we don't know what they're doing. They seem to not know necessarily. Well, they claim to not know what they're doing. Yet McCarthy being in the conversation warrants a 16-1 play. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think that is certainly very interesting. Let's go ahead and look at the number 3 overall pick market, Ben. A very similar kind of idea here. May the favorite, which by the way, that should be backing up here to again. This is like my new computer is kind of acting a fool here.
Dithering, they say, right?
Yeah, hold on. I need to just get a mouse, honestly. Okay, here we go with Drake May being the favorite. That should be a movie, by the way, starring the late Dink in May the favorite. For anybody in gambling Twitter who or in the gambling space that gets that joke here. So May is -115. This one McCarthy's closer to 4-1. We have Daniels at +175. This is again another one where. Again, May is the favorite here, I think only by default, by the fact that he's not the favorite to beat second. And this is a good point by Very Difficult, our friend here.
Back to
May Daniels head-to-head back-to-back is -115 at Circa. Again, Circa has been kind of the one, even Jeff Benson, the one of the heads over there, very, very good, also very transparent with how he sort of moves things, is talking about how they're basically moving on bets right now because the bettors have more information obviously than the bookmakers there. So that's a very interesting sort of discussion topic there. So I don't think that there's much to discuss here. Pick number 4. Go ahead, Ben.
Well, I was going to say, I do think just in general, like the 3rd overall pick and what the Patriots actually end up doing with it is very much going to influence like a lot of other bets within the 1st round that I think maybe some people find would have value. To me, like, and this is kind of, I think, like the inflection point of the draft is the 3rd overall pick in general, because I do think if the Patriots stay and select a quarterback, like that's very much the path to going over 4.5 quarterbacks, seeing Penix and Bo Nix potentially slide up into the 1st round, seeing like a little bit of like a mid 1st round run on quarterbacks. But I think if they trade that selection to a team like Minnesota, it does like stand to reason that we could see the 4th quarterback, whatever one that the Commanders and the Vikings don't end up going with in that scenario, dropping to like I would say almost the teens or like the high 10s, maybe falling out of the top 10 pick sort of situation. I think that's when you see guys like Penix and Nix potentially slide and go, over their draft position number based on that quarterback movement. So I think it's interesting. I do think I'm still would be somewhat surprised if the Patriots actually make the selection. But I do think that their particular viewpoint of how they view this, quarterback class is very much going to make or break a lot of those bets in the mid to latter half of the first round.
Yeah, for sure. I think. By the way, the second half has started in St. Louis. Case Cookus takes a sack on first down. There trips over his own running back. I do agree. I mean, I think when you look at New England, I've said this a few times. I think New England's, they were fifth in yards per play allowed defensively. I think that they were much better defensively than the sum of the parts. We've seen a decent amount of evidence for that, right? Jamie Collins when he left, J.C. Jackson when he left. Guys like Kyle Van Noy, Jelani Tavai, even guys like Patrick Chung, whenever they've gone other places, it's never been all that pretty for them. Josh Uche, when he got a chance to be a free agent, a player who's been very productive at the NFL level, I think that he didn't get much in the way of a contract offer from an NFL team this year. I think people look at that defense and think that Belichick is really the star that stirs the drink. And so with him gone, I think the defense is worse personnel-wise and will be worse production-wise than even we thought. And then you couple that with the offense being terrible last year. Like, I think that this roster is further away from being good than the third best quarterback in the draft. Now, if they end up with Drake May, he might be the second best quarterback in the draft. But I think the roster is further away than being saved by the third best quarterback in the draft would suggest that they could be, if that makes sense. So I think trading, it makes sense for them specifically. And Minnesota, on the other hand, is obviously much more well-stocked with players. Even New York Giants are a much more well-stocked team with players. For the same reason, I don't think it makes sense for Vegas or for the Denver Broncos to move up, Ben.
Right, definitely. And I think that's like kind of the point of this whole discussion. And I think, in that scenario where the Vikings do end up moving up and taking the quarterback, the Patriots at 11, I very much think would pass on that fourth guy, potentially kind of like you said, where the Raiders and the Broncos view their rosters as well. Like, they could be more than just a quarterback away. And I know like next year's quarterback draft class isn't that highly thought of at this point in time, but one of those teams is very much going to be in the mix for the number one overall selection. And I think there's a case to be made for all three of them, at least having the mindset to be waiting on a quarterback. So I do think there is possibility that you do see that typical quarterback slide with the fourth guy off the board. If that happens, like the Penix and the Bo Nix situation, I think gets more murky. And I think we maybe see that continuously slide maybe even into the second round of the draft.
Yeah, Memphis has to punt. St. Louis with the football picks up a first down. Caleb Burton interviewing the famous A.J. McCarron family. I want to look at these two markets, Ben. Number of offensive linemen drafted in round one, and not number of quarterbacks. I'm sorry. I want to look at although number of quarterbacks is interesting. I want to look at number of wide receivers. Now, I think that these markets are appropriately juiced. When I look at over 9.5 offensive linemen going up at minus 194 to the over, and number of wide receivers drafted in round one under 6.5 to be minus 250 to the under. The fifth year option has been a discussion that I think a lot of people who are not involved in teams and who are not necessarily the sharpest we'll talk about, because they're like, oh, teams will trade back into the first round and get that fifth year option. That actually hasn't happened very often. Right. And in fact, I think since 2020, the new CBA, it hasn't happened at all. And that's because the fifth year option, especially for quarterbacks, is actually not that good of a deal, right? Right. Jordan Love, we just saw that fifth year option was actually something that was contentious, even though he hadn't played. He hadn't hit any of those escalators. Now, that being said, for a position that is hard to develop in, offensive linemen, for example, like Jedrick Wills' fifth year option was $11 million. Even Tristan Wirfs last year was like 14. for a guy that like had played and played well. That one, to me, if you hit on a lineman and he develops into a player, then that fifth-year option actually does present a value down the road, right? If you're going to be one of those teams, like let's say you're a rebuilding team and you covet that surplus at the end of the deal, right? Versus wide receiver, where if a guy comes in and kills it right away, he's going to hit the escalators. That fifth-year option is going to be a lot more. That fifth-year surplus isn't as high. I think what you're going to see, if you do see teams trading back into round one, it is going to be at the expense of wide receivers and at the benefit of offensive linemen. And so I do believe, and if you can find alternates here. So for example, if you can find an alt under 5.5 at plus money, an alt over 10.5 at plus money here for offensive linemen and wide receivers, reverse respectively here, I do think that is a good play.
Yeah, I was actually, so I did do a decent spot yesterday, and we had a discussion on Penix and Bo Nix basically, and the movement in which Penix has kind of dropped dramatically at places like Circa on his draft position number. But and that was very much my counter, is essentially what you had basically just said, is like us as bettors and the betting market in general is overvaluing how much teams actually care about that fifth-year option for especially at certain positions like quarterback and wide receiver, because of the things you said. I think, the 2021 projections for the fifth-year option for that draft class, like if the guy made multiple Pro Bowls, it's like $38 million or something at the quarterback position, $34 million if they made one Pro Bowl. So like that's, close to top 10, top 12 money anyways. I do think there is maybe a benefit to teams of having that flexibility to figure out the long-term contract with the guy. But I think teams now see, the situations with, second round picks. And I know, Jalen Hurts was basically like the start of this, but I do think like that approach is more so the direction that teams are trying to gravitate towards. And I agree with you that they're not going to trade up and get these premium positions. And I do think, you said offensive lineman. I think to me, edge rusher and cornerback as well, depending on the depth of that actual draft class, like those are positions that I think teams are actually going to covet towards the end of the first round, more so than quarterback and wide receiver. So I'm definitely with you. And I do think in some ways like that's going to point towards those teams at the end of the first round, kind of like gravitate towards those positions outside of, maybe your Kansas City Chiefs or something.
St. Louis inexplicably runs on 3rd and 2 a jet pass, and it gets loss of 3. They have to punt. Then they get called for delay on 4th down. So we are halfway through the third quarter. It is 20-17 St. Louis in this game. Here's a couple. Okay, let's talk about some markets here, and I want to talk about looking at these again, player to team markets, and let's look at Buffalo, for example. Again, we talked about this a little bit last week, but when you look at these teams, Benjamin Solak had a tweet, and I think, it was pretty innocent, but I do think it sort of highlights a thing where he was saying he was struggling with, basically writing his mock draft because he doesn't feel like he really understands like a good ordering of players within positions. And I think that's true, but I also think that the market totals, which we just saw, is really highlighting this. In a draft where the first round only has a combined 1 projected tight end, running back, linebacker, and 17 combined offensive lineman, wide receiver, let's say, it's going to be harder to do mock drafts because we're always bad at picking which player within a position is going to go to a team. We are relatively better at picking which position is going to go to a team. But when only a few positions are going to go in round 1, that makes the process of mocking a lot harder. And so when I look at, for example, this market, these markets, I think, to that point though, I think that these markets, for example, the Bills to draft the wide receiver first. I look at this market here where I look at Carolina, for example, wide receiver first. Now, this isn't quite as bad. And in fact, offensive lineman has gone from 6-1 to a little bit more than 2-1 here. I do think that these markets, the only place that you can go, and we talked about this last week, the only place that you can go, I think, for some of these is towards a well-chosen underdog in these. And you kind of want to look, I think, a few, sort of years ahead at premium positions. So, for example, for the Bengals, offensive lineman certainly is a position where they need, but like cornerback could be another one where they haven't really invested at that position in the draft or free agency in forever. Tight end could be another one example if Brock Bowers falls to them or something. Like when you look at position to team markets, I do think that this is a place where you can scoop up some value because the player to team ones, I think there's enough uncertainty and enough vig here where you're going to get caught. You're going to get caught trying to discern a lack of information from teams, but these ones, I think that there is some value.
Yeah, definitely. I do think, kind of like you said, I do think the Bengals in general, going cornerback does make a lot of sense. Obviously, they went Cam Taylor-Britt, a couple seasons ago, drafted Dax Hill, kind of in the similar vein. But I do think there is, probably a need for somebody. Obviously, I think, Mike Hilton in the slot is like a pretty good slot type cornerback. But I do think, somebody along with Cam Taylor-Britt definitely makes sense. And like you said, there is probably going to be some discussion of where Taylor-Britt even fits in, in the next couple of seasons. So you do want depth at that particular position. I think you can make a strong case at 8.5 to 1. Why the Bengals would go in that direction. I think the mark. I do think there is like an intrigue when the market is so heavily in favor of one particular position, especially on some of these teams, because I do think, like, even what Beat Gamer said in the chat, like, the run on certain positions are just so hard to project that laying something in any of these markets, I think they're much more, it's much better to take some of the long shot opportunities at some of the more premium positions as opposed to laying like a decent favorite, I would say, for sure.
Yeah, like for example, Green Bay here, offensive line does appear to be the position that everybody's talking about, and it does make a lot of sense because, the average team is going to take an offensive lineman. If the plurality of teams are going to take offensive linemen in this draft in the first round. But it makes sense for Green Bay, but Green Bay's never been a team that's taken, positions of need. Look at wide receiver. Same thing with Detroit. Detroit cornerback makes a lot of sense. But their center's starting to get a little bit older, and they're kind of right in that position where they could take one of the good centers in the draft and so forth. So that's another possibility there. So yeah, I think that these are the markets where you really want to look, and I think, like, when you look at some of these particular ones, this is another one that's interesting that just has popped up here. Second offensive lineman taken. This is one where Joe Alt at plus 430 to me feels like a solid play. If you don't actually think that Joe Alt is the first lineman, taking him to be the second lineman seems like a solid one. Ben, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, I actually don't mind it. To me, I think I'm probably a little higher, and I think there's like a pretty clear separation between Joe Alt and the rest of the tackle position. So I that would maybe be my one concern, but kind of like you said, like if he's not first off the board, he's very much going to be second. And the fact that he's, the fifth most likely because of that reason, in some ways, if you have doubts about him being the first one off the board because the team goes in a different direction, like I don't mind that sort of play as a little bit of a diversification on Joe Alt, landing in like landing as the second overall offense tackle off the board.
Case Cookus takes a strip sack on third down, looks injured. He's been taking a lot of hits this spring football season and last spring football season. In fact, he took obviously a broken leg in the last USFL, second to last USFL season. Our guy Case Cookus very much taking a beating. So obviously this is going to be our last podcast before the draft, I think. When as I'm sort of looking at kind of the places, where I think there's value, one place I do want to travel to is the former Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. This one has gone down from 16 to 1 of late. I think the Chiefs to take a defensive lineman edge. I do think defensive interior is a need for them. Now, a true nose tackle is really what they need. But that one is one that makes a lot of sense. Offensive lineman at plus 135 as well does make a lot of sense. I wouldn't be surprised if they finally took a wide receiver in the first round, but they have not taken a wide receiver in the first round, if I'm not mistaken, since Jonathan Baldwin, I think in 2011, which has a tie to Sumer Sports because famously Bill Belichick told our CEO Thomas Dimitroff that Jonathan Baldwin was, quote, as good as Julio Jones. So that smarts a little bit if I remember correctly. But this is one where I do like them to go defensive lineman, and this is one where it could be a trade back. I remember that I know John Dorsey was the GM when this happened, but when they in 2016 traded out of the first round back and then took Chris Jones with their first pick, that again, remember, that is an out that can happen a lot. There are teams, Cleveland, Carolina, that could trade back into round one. They have to have a trade partner to do it. And so when you're thinking about some of these teams, especially from 20 to 32, that could be when you're thinking about their first pick market, think about safety, for example, safety and linebacker. We know that it's very unlikely that there's going to be a safety or a linebacker taken in round one. But if a team trades out of round one, this could very well be their first, the position of their first pick, even as such, right? And the similar idea with Minnesota in 2022 when Kwesi moved all the way back to 32 and took Lewis Cine.
Right. Yeah, I think it's actually a really good opportunity because there are some of these situations where it is, 60 to 1, like you could diversify a little bit on some of these teams, especially ones that have shown at least the mindset to trade back a little bit. Maybe even a team like San Francisco as well. I know those aren't getting as quite as outlandish as what Kansas City was offered, but I don't mind like sprinkling that across a few teams in the back half of the first round as kind of like an opportunity for a trade back, because I think it is, a decent idea. I would say that might happen for sure. There's just so much unknown with how the first half, even like the first 10 picks matters so much in the first 3 picks, and so much is influenced by information that we're not going to have until the draft. So I do think, playing a little bit more of the longer markets is always something that's going to be the approach that I gravitate towards for sure.
Yeah, as our friend Difficult said, it's been somewhat of a disaster for the Boats. A punt, not a great punt. The referee doing a walk down the sideline out of bounds on the Memphis side of the field. The last thing I want to talk about before we do preview the USFL week 4 is the other position. So this one, first running back taken, do not, under any circumstances, take like basically Trey Benson or Jonathan Brooks. Those two might be the first running back taken, but once you get to a position where the first guy taken is in the second or third round, like there is just no value in playing anybody who's less than like 9-2, like Blake Corum, because it's a styles make fight situation at that point. And just like when Ariza was like the first, was a huge favorite to be the first specialist taken his year. It's just at that late in the draft, these teams have to like fall in love with those positions, and it's just a really bad gamble to go ahead and do that, right, Ben?
Right, very much so, and I do agree with you. Like, there's just so many reasons why a team can go in a slightly different direction based on just what we're hearing from a public sentiment standpoint on some of these deeper positions. I do think second tight end is maybe one that makes a little bit more sense to me to go to the favorite. I think if you're looking just at straight draft position numbers right now, like Ben Sennett is like, I would say somewhat dramatically flipped on Jatavian Sanders for who's going to be selected for, or whose draft position is better on Circa basically. And I do think that, both from a mock draft standpoint, like we've seen Ben Sennett's EDP move much lower than what Jatavian Sanders has been. I think some of the more popular mock drafts are kind of having him ahead. So I actually don't mind, getting plus 125 on Ben Sennett. That is one that I think should maybe be closer to a minus price for that second tight end. But I do agree with you on like the running back position and how to approach, some of these markets where it is going to be, a day 2 guy as the first one off the board for sure.
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of your "this one's different" take on that, but
That's true.
but sure. The St. Louis gets called for holding there at seconds. Well, at the moment here, it's 2nd and 16. I might be a little bit behind on the stream. You can see the live odds here for the Battlehawks against the Boats. If you bet over, it did seem like a pretty solid pretty solid play. And now you are kind of sweating it out a little bit. But nonetheless, it looks like St. Louis has at least picked up a first down here. I'm looking at the Birmingham Stallions here. I made this game against the DC Defenders. I made this game 10, opened 8, got down to 7.5. This thing was like kind of split for a little bit this week, Ben. I think it's settling in at 9. No real opinion now that it's there. The totals, obviously
Everything crept up.
Very difficult, incredibly sharp guy. Turned us on to the overs last week. The overs went 4-0. That was quite sharp, and really none of the overs had any real sweat to them.
Right.
So now they're all kind of creeping up. This Panthers Brahmas one is interesting because Josh Love, EJ Perry, I thought had a better game than most of his outings last week. And Quentin Dormady lost obviously the quarterback battle to Chase Garbers. But I thought like last year he showed a little bit more explosiveness. Most of the passes that Garbers was throwing were kind of like within a few yards of the line of scrimmage, and I didn't think that there was much oomph to that offense. I think Dormady might add something there. I think that over is probably a good play. It looks like a low block is going to be called on St. Louis on a pretty solid screenplay there. That's not great. So that's the only like total I think has any legs. Arlington, they're bad defensively. Houston's bad offensively. So we'll see which one of those wins out. That number has crept out to 3 at times, but now it's kind of settling in at a juice 2.5. Ben, do you have any takes on any of these numbers going into week 4?
No, I mean, kind of like you said, like the totals, after going 4-0 have jumped up dramatically. To me, kind of like what you said, it's tough to lay anything at 46.5 just based on, where Houston's offense has actually lived the first 3 weeks of the season. I do agree with you that Birmingham is probably like the only side. Maybe there's something more so in like the first half spread as opposed to the full game number. But that is kind of it. I don't know. It's going to be light. I think you got to, I would say, strap into the double header tonight and get some, live plays in, because I think you got to see kind of like what you said a couple weeks ago, kind of how these opening play scripts transpire. And if we do get some stops early, there could be an opportunity under in some of those areas. So.
Yeah, it does seem like the books are live trading these games a lot more aggressively. And what I mean is they, like, for example, it looks like there could have been an interception at the line of scrimmage here.
Oh boy. AJ?
It looks incomplete actually. But like it looks like the books are live trading these games a lot more. So for example, St. Louis was 7, St. Louis was at times pretty big favorites going into this game pre-flop, and Memphis looks a lot better than the sort of the pregame expectations were, and they're adjusting quite a bit off of it, which has been, I think, interesting. Similar things have happened, other weeks this season. So that's something to sort of keep your eye on, and can be if you're watching the game and sort of like have a decent idea as far as whether something's real or not. So for example, last week Memphis was playing Birmingham on the Saturday night game, and their first touchdown, they kind of hung around in the first half because of a turnover. That wasn't necessarily real. And so you got decent numbers on Birmingham live and in the second half. Like you could probably do that more likely in this league than other leagues, I would say. Obviously, because there's just a lack of data. Big pickup by Hakeem Butler, Eagles legend, Iowa State legend.
Iowa State legend for sure. I remember his he was supposed to break the mold, at least as far as a freak of nature at the wide receiver position, but just couldn't run basically. I mean, I'm so happy that he's having success in the UFL though. He's the perfect situation for what makes the UFL great, to be honest with you. Is all the prior takes with him at Iowa State, thankfully, are finally coming to fruition in the UFL.
Yeah.
So
our guy Bruce Gradkowski, I think. Look, I'm not gonna speak for him, but I think Bruce is probably having to do quite a bit of extra work here with AJ McCarron. Although AJ scoots out to the left here, picks up a decent amount of yardage. It looks like we're probably gonna have to get to the end of the third quarter here, where the Battlehawks lead by 3 and driving. But Bruce Gradkowski is now pictured. I think he's doing a good job. I think McCarron is quite a bit limited, as are most quarterbacks in this league. And this offense has really done a pretty solid job of moving the football, I would say. So I'm pretty proud of one of our fellow PFF alumni, Bruce here. So
making it big in the world. Making it big in the world, right?
Yeah. So I guess look, let's feed the people here. If I had to, I would say I would still I made Stallions -10, so I guess at -9 plus 100 that has value, but very little because the points in the UFL are not worth it. Well, in most football, 10 is worth something, but in a league where extra points are not standard and we don't have a ton of data, I'm not exactly sure yet what that's worth. So again, there's probably a little bit of value there, but not a ton. There is. I make Brahmas. I make Brahmas here -3 in this game, so there is a lot of value. But I've made my delta between market and me on Brahmas has been huge the whole year, and the Brahmas have only covered one of the 3 games that they've played. So take that with a grain of salt, but I do think that Brahma's an over for the second straight week. Last week we split. This week, hopefully we can go 2 for 2. And then I do make Arlington, who is 0-3, but much better 0-3 than Houston is. I make Arlington -5 in this game. I think that they are much better than Houston is, and home field advantage in the UFL is about half a point from what I can estimate. So I think that there is value on Arlington in that one. If anything, I think under is the value there, but Arlington's defense is terrible, and I think Reed Stinnett did show some spunk in the last week of games.
You fed the people. I mean, that was a very good synopsis, basically. That's giving. Usually you would do that on a Sunday, but thank you for delivering on a Saturday, Eric. I definitely appreciate it.
Matt asked a good question. I don't follow the UFL. Is there any coach or team breaking the mold or innovating? Or is it more of the same? It's mostly the same. I mean, I think AJ Smith, Brahmas, does an okay job, but it's not. I think from his perspective, even then, I think that there is still a decent amount of. There's just a lot of there's a lot of just punting on 4th down. There's a lot of going for 2 or going for 1 when going for 2 is plus EV. There's a lot of you could go for 3 here. There's just a lot of still negative EV football played in this league, and I think the Brahmas have good coaching. I think Birmingham has good coaching. I think St. Louis has good coaching. I don't think that the league as a whole has good coaching, and I don't think that anybody's being all that innovative though in this league. And so you can't really, I think, bet on that league. Interesting how everybody's. Yeah, so this is interesting. Akesh, interesting how everybody's waiting for data on the key numbers. Can't just run a rational sim. Yeah, I don't think you can run a rational sim on this league is kind of my point, because you don't know how these teams are going to act. Like you don't know, like for example, the percentage of time teams are going to run 1, 2, or 3-point conversions. Matt, you wanted to talk about a couple things before. Ben, you wanted to talk about Matt Collar's clip?
Yeah, I had to give shout out to our Vikings Twitter legend Matt Collar, basically finding the clip of like, it wasn't Monday, Thursday, I don't know what it was exactly, but Kevin O'Connell was preaching at a church in Minnesota and got asked a question basically by somebody in the Vikings Twitter, someone in the Vikings Twitter street, and actually gave a reasonable answer. Would you put any stock into him providing more information because he was in the Lord's house than what he would normally do at an
Oh my
NFL
gosh,
media
that's
contract?
a good point.
Like, because you're not allowed to lie in church, so I do feel like there's maybe like overcompensation of value on this particular clip with what the Vikings might do and if they are moving up or not, I guess. But did you take anything away from that clip?
Here's my question. Are you more likely to lie because, so this is like a prisoner's dilemma type of thing ish. Are you more likely to lie because you're in church and you think that people are more likely to believe you can't lie?
Yeah. That's the question. I do think I would not have taken it to that level. I think it is actually organic because I'm assuming that Kevin O'Connell had no idea that it was actually being recorded, and I think it was just
that's the thing though. Like I think Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah are quite good. I grew up watching Vikings games and rooting for the Vikings. And
Denny Green.
I've said, Dennis Green, Red McCombs. Like I gave a lecture at the Red McCombs, building in Texas just a month ago. This is the first time I've been optimistic about Vikings brass since like the early days of Brad Childress
early days of
Brad Childress. Look at AJ McCarron throwing a touchdown here. There we go. Good job, Bruce. But if he didn't know that it was like his quarterback's dad got caught saying something kind of funky at a church a couple years ago, right?
That's true.
If Kevin O'Connell didn't know he was going to be recorded in a church, I got some issues with my guy, right?
It's true. It's true. So I don't know. I thought it was an amazing find by Matt Collar. I also thought it was an amazing question, amazing answer. So it's just
by the way, Matt's a good friend of both of ours. Matt's not a church going guy, right? So the fact that he was able to find it, very, very good by him. The fact that the fact that I was trying to Ben, the first time in my life I multitasked and messed up. I was like reading it and I called you Matt on accident.
That's okay. It happens. It's maybe the first time. I don't know if your wife would agree with that being the first time it's messed up or not, but I do think it's pretty close to my first experience with it for sure. So I definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, so we're gonna head out here. This has been a lot of fun. Again, Tej Seth and I, speaking of Matthew Collar, Tej Seth and I were on Matthew Collar's Purple Insider podcast. It was a lot of fun. Myself, Ben Brown, Tej Seth, Sam Brookhouse, and Sean Syed are going to be all over the place. Ben's done like 6 hits last week.
I'm doing Vikings Insider actually or Purple Insider. I'm doing Purple Insider on Monday basically with Matt.
So we're going to be all over the place. I was on BetMGM the other night, like Sirius XM, of course. We have replays of our show. By the way, our Thursday stream is going to be sponsored by Underdog Fantasy, which will be great. They've been an awesome partner pre-draft so far. So all kinds of really fun stuff. Our mock draft came out yesterday. We're going to have another one coming out Thursday morning of the draft. This is my favorite time of year. It's my favorite sort of like event. I'm so excited for you guys to get to go to Detroit. Hopefully all of you that are here watching the stream with us will join us on Thursday. It'll be such a good time. You'll obviously get to hear from Thomas. You'll get to hear from me. You'll get to hear from a few others. We actually have Justin Pugh, current Giants offensive lineman. He'll be coming on the show for a little bit. We'll have Brad Spielberger, who is now an NFL agent. He's going to come update us on what his life is like now that he's representing players in the draft. We're going to have some voiceovers from some scouts, including Mike Mayock. It's going to be an awesome time. I'm so excited. I just can't wait. So For Ben Brown, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.